Pittsburgh Steelers fans, it is time for the second ever edition of The Curtain Call. My name is Michael Beck, Deputy Editor of Steel.com, joined as always by the fantastic Mr. Geoffrey Benedict. Geoffrey, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing really good, man. Now,
since the last time we met up, the Steelers made a pretty substantial move at quarterback. Substantial might be pushing it a little bit, but it's basically been a week now since they brought in Dwayne Haskins. So I'm just curious your early thoughts on that signing and basically your $50,000 couple deal. The Steelers don't lose any money, very low risk. But what are your thoughts on the Steelers' newest quarterback?
I like the acquisition a lot. He's raw. He's got a lot of talent, though. You look at his early seasons; they're not good, but they're not bad. They're not terrible. They're not like a 2-touchdown, 12 interception like Peyton Manning first year special kind of year, whatever his numbers were. They were terrible. Like you have those guys that were absolutely terrible. Alex Smith, his first season was absolutely terrible. Haskins wasn't in that category, so I think he's got a chance. I don't think he's as much of a bad seed as people think he is. Obviously, he made like a bad choice, but when we look at the NFL, a bad choice is kind of a relative thing. Like, he broke COVID protocol to go to a party. It's selfish. It's dumb. But on the spectrum of bad decisions, it's not, NFL bad decision level. Like, it's not that big. I think it's a great move. I think you give him a couple years, let him sit for a year, let him play. Maybe you get an Alex Smith type of situation where you get a good, solid starter from a guy that you just picked up off the waiver wire, off the cut rack. I think it's a great move. I saw it was only 1 year. I was kind of hoping for 2, just so he'd be around more. But as you told me earlier as we started this, he'd be a restricted free agent. So it really is a 2-year deal. I like it. It's good.
Yeah, with the deal, I'm curious, do you think this might hinder the Steelers from, say, trading up and drafting a quarterback or sticking at 24? Do you think they could still potentially bring someone in?
I don't think they're going to move up to draft a quarterback. If someone fell to 24 that they were like, well, now you got to take them, then I think they'd take it. But I don't think they would have prioritized quarterback anyways. In my opinion, I don't think we'll see a quarterback drafted this year unless Ben Roethlisberger retires. And I think he's sticking around. So, yeah.
You know what? To me, that feels like playing with fire a little bit. Having someone not really prepared, I guess. It seems like the best quarterbacks these days usually get a year to sit under a guy. So that scares me, especially with the quarterback class next year. Yeah, obviously we're going to have tons of draft stuff coming out as the weeks go on here, but I'm just a little bit scared off by next year's quarterback class, and the Steelers' defense is still far too good to ever be in a position to draft first overall. But speaking of that defense, I know you wanted some time tonight to kind of talk about why people should stop blaming the defense for the failures against the Cleveland Browns. So if you want to take the floor and explain why that game wasn't the defense's fault, by all means, Jeff, go for it.
Well, this is going to lead straight into our main topic about injuries. If you just look at not just that game, even if you look at the last, the big 4 losses to me, I don't care about the Cleveland game where we sat everybody. I don't care. That was a close game, whatever. It was Mason Rudolph. It didn't matter. We knew we could lose that game. We rested everybody and said, well, let's see if these guys can go and win a game anyways. But if you look at the 4 other games they lost, the game to the Washington football team, to the Buffalo Bills, Cincinnati Bengals, and then the wild card game to Cleveland, and you look at the people who were out, and I'm not trying to make an excuse. I'm just saying the team wasn't the team you think it was in those games. And it wasn't a good team because they were missing people. Obviously, the team went downhill significantly after Bud Dupree went down. They already were down Devin Bush. They were covering for him. That loss, and that's a big loss. That's a huge loss. Bud Dupree was another big one. And with those 2 out to start, now you're adding other people to it. For example, in Washington, James Conner is down. Marquise Pouncey was down, which meant J.C. Hassenauer, who's not a starter and shouldn't start. I don't really even like him as a backup. He played really poorly this season. So Pouncey's out. Hassenauer was in at center. You're down Steven Nelson. You're down Chris Boswell. Robert Spelaine played 21 snaps, which I do want to get into that. I just did a whole film room where I covered that part of the game. 21 snaps. He had a sack, 2 QB hits, and a tackle for loss in 21 snaps, and then was off the field, and the Steelers couldn't stop the football team again. Justin Lane plays 28 snaps, gives up 4 for 4 and a touchdown. Cameron Sutton gave up the most receiving yards on our defense of anyone. Then you go into Buffalo, they're down Hayden, they're down Spelaine, Williams. They're down all their linebackers. You're playing Buffalo, you don't have linebackers. They moved Stephon Diggs to the other side to face Cameron Sutton because Cameron Sutton couldn't handle Stephon Diggs. Steven Nelson can handle Stephon Diggs pretty well. Sutton couldn't. Sutton ends up getting beat out there, and they start attacking that flat. They start attacking the right flat where Joe Hayden normally jumps routes. That's Vince Williams and Avery Williamson in coverage over there. And they just start abusing that side of the defense because there's no help. Cameron Sutton is worried about, he's facing Stephon Diggs. He's getting beat. You go into Cincy. They're down Dotson, Filer, Connor. Hassenhauer is playing at guard. It was a nightmare. Hassenhauer at guard was absolutely terrible. They can't run the ball. Then they're still down Spelaine and Williams. You don't have linebackers, and Cincinnati runs all over us, including a big run from Finley, their quarterback, for a touchdown that really won the game for them, was the difference in winning the game. And we don't have Bud Dupree. Quarterbacks don't do that when Bud Dupree's on the field. They just don't. Alex Highsmith and our linebackers are gone. It was Avery Williamson and the safety. We turned Marcus Allen. Playing linebacker. Like, that's your inside linebackers. What are you doing? Then, Cincinnati, then the wild card game, Spelaine comes back. Hayden's still out. Spelaine comes back, but he is like nothing that game. He was terrible. He was not ready to play. That was the first game back from IR. He wasn't good. Filer came back. He wasn't good. And then the big thing is Pouncey's snap over Ben Roethlisberger's head. And to me, that's something I do want to get into as we make decisions for the future, especially about Maurkice Pouncey. If you remember back to the Indianapolis game, who was it spoke up at halftime, got the team going? Maurkice Pouncey. Maurkice Pouncey is the vocal and emotional leader of this offense. There isn't another guy out there, maybe even on the team. You got Cam Hayward and Maurkice Pouncey, and that's it. And when Pouncey snapped that ball over Ben's head, you could see he was visually deflated, and the team did not recover. And in my opinion, that's because the guy that is the one who goes and gets the team back and says, hey, let's snap out of it and get some back together, get some going. It was Maurkice Pouncey, and he was the problem at that point. He was just bad. He wasn't feeling it. He wasn't there. So that, in my opinion, people, you look at the end of the season, that wasn't your Pittsburgh Steelers team that went 11-0. That wasn't your Pittsburgh Steelers team that played the first so many weeks. That was a shell. That was a pathetic excuse for a team because of injuries, largely because of that. And that's our topic for today.
Yeah, and before we dive into some of these players and what their kind of injuries and them moving forward to this team, before getting to that, you mentioned Maurkice Pouncey, and I do want to kind of bring this up now. But of course, this kind of past week, rumors again have popped up that Maurkice Pouncey's thinking about retirement. He's told that to his teammates, but nothing's official yet. The rumor kind of the last, day and a half now is that Ben Roethlisberger is the one person that's trying to convince him to come back. So I guess on one side of that, we know that Ben's 100% in on this upcoming season. But my thinking here is is Ben the general manager? All of a sudden, the Steelers could be in a serious cap crunch. Ben could convince him to not retire. Then the Steelers are like, okay, you're cut. What's going on? Does Ben have that much power, or should Maurkice Pouncey even be brought back?
If Ben can convince Maurkice Pouncey to come back, I love it personally. I would love that. He gets a lot of flack. He is not the guy he used to be. People remember plays where he loses leverage right off the bat to a big, powerful defensive tackle, gets driven back in the pocket. He still doesn't give up sacks. He averages a pressure a game allowed. That's not bad. That is really good. In my opinion, he's still we're just spoiled, frankly, because we're used to seeing Maurkice Pouncey, and we compare him then to people like, Dermontti Dawson and Jeff Harding's guys who were great centers themselves too. Maurkice Pouncey, in my opinion, he's right in that top 5 centers in the NFL range. Like center's just not that big a position where there's that many good players each year. So for me, Pouncey's probably still top 5. There are quotes out there where people are talking, like other defensive coordinators in the AFC are saying, no, he's still a top dude. Like, he is absolutely still a top dude. If he doesn't retire, he's a top guy again, probably next year. So for me, I want him back because that gives you a year this year, man, to get a tackle, get someone like that in the first round, really start a rebuild. You still have that emotional, mental leadership on the offensive line to help guys like Dotson. We saw how great Dotson was this season. Him and Pouncey were fantastic next to each other. You saw after almost every play Dotson was in, Pouncey was talking to him. Almost every single play. You can't replace that when you're developing young players. You can't replace that value. So for me, if he can get Pouncey back, that's fantastic. I don't think Ben's the GM. I just think they've probably let him know, or at least probably let Pouncey know. If you're back, you're back. Like, if you want to come back, your starting spot is there for you if you want it. And that's what I expect. So if he's back, I'm good with it. That buys us a year to get a center.
Yeah, if Ben wants all these guys back, he better be willing to take a pay cut, because there's no way half of them are coming back if he's expecting to get his full cap hit. But getting into today's topic and going back pretty far in the chat here, Ryan Kellerman pretty much says it best. We lost every game but one since Bud Dupree went down. Just saying. Now, Bud Dupree, that's a name that kind of got some of emotion in the Twitterverse and the radio sphere when he talked about potentially wanting a 1-year, $6 million contract, to which he replied with laughing, crying emojis. We know that's not gonna be the case, but there are some contracts that are comparable, that are kind of low in the first year and exponentially grow years after that. Which the Steelers, they have a ton of cap space after this season, this next upcoming season. So it is possible that the Steelers might be able to swing this and keep Bud Dupree. Is that a guy the Steelers should prioritize in trying to get back into the fold of this defense?
I've got one question, because I'm a Bud Dupree fan. I said this last week. I'm a huge Bud Dupree fan. He is my favorite Steeler until the day he is no longer a Steeler, and then he's going to be my favorite non-Steeler. Like, I love Bud Dupree football. I love it. But man, if he comes back, even if they can afford it, everything works, where do you play these guys? Like, Robert Splaine's back. Devin Bush is back. They started playing 3 outside linebackers because they didn't have Devin Bush. But they're going to have Devin Bush back. You're going to have, like, TJ Watt. You're going to have Bud Dupree. TJ Watt and Bud Dupree are 80% of snap guys. At least 40% of the snaps left for Alex Highsmith. And after last season, with another offseason to improve, are you only playing Alex Highsmith 40, 50% of snaps? I don't think you can do that. Like, these guys, none of those 3 are, 70% of the snap guys. They're 80% of the snap guys. That's what you do. I could see playing them 75%, but there's not enough snaps for these guys to all play. So while I would love it, it doesn't make sense, simply because, like, you're putting a really good player on the bench and you're paying Bud Dupree. So to me, Bud fits in that category of players who are worth more to other teams than he is to us, simply because we've got that position. We've got another outside guy that can play. We saw him play. So I don't think he's back.
Now, speaking of one of those linebackers you mentioned, Devin Bush, of course, being one of the pillars of this defense, and something we're going to talk about a little bit later in the podcast, probably in the second half. But Devin Bush, the second he went down, this defense changed completely, much like how when Bud Dupree went down, everything changed from there on out. So what does it mean having Devin Bush on the field, and how does he change the Steelers defense?
Well, we saw the Steelers run heavy man and blitz heavily early in the season with Devin Bush playing. And to me, the number one, if you're at home and you want to look it up yourself, go to any stats site that tracks by game stats, shows you the season. Pro Football Reference is a great place to go. Look at Vince Williams and Mike Hilton and what they did the first 5 games of the season. Because that's when Devin Bush was playing. Vince Williams was leading the league in tackles for a loss. Vince Williams and Mike Hilton had 5 sacks between them in 4 games. In the first 4 games, they had 5 sacks between them. For the rest of the season, they got, I think, 1. Vince Williams got 1. Hilton never got another sack. They were lighting teams up. And then Devin Bush went down. And all of a sudden, Vince is dropping into coverage and getting exposed. Mike Hilton was hurt as well. And when he came back, the linebacker situation was in bad enough shape. Hilton barely blitzed at the end of the season. He was mostly dropping into coverage because we didn't have Devin Bush. Devin Bush can drop into coverage on almost anybody. We were like, part of the problems we had early in the season, you'd be like, why is Devin Bush on that guy? Well, because he can. Because he can cover him decently. Yeah, he gave up a 20-yard catch there, but you don't look at the other 3 plays where the Steelers made plays in the offense's backfield and stopped drives because Devin Bush was able to cover somebody and they were able to send Vince Williams and Mike Hilton, and those guys are disruptive. So to me, Devin Bush is one of those key players who makes everyone else better by covering for so many other players' weaknesses and allowing them to play to their strengths. And one of the things we talk about with Keith Butler, people used to complain about, is you got to use players to their strengths. You know, why do you have this guy out here doing this? Why do you have these guys doing all these things? When you have players like a Terrell Edmonds, you have a player like Bud Dupree, Devin Bush, you've got a lot of players like that. Even a Steven Nelson is one of them, who they may not show up a lot on the stats, but because of the work they do, other people are free to go get those stats and make those plays.
Now, kind of rounding out that linebacking core, Robert Spelaine was someone else that obviously missed a ton of time with injury. He's an exclusive rights free agent, so he's not going anywhere unless the Steelers want to move on from him. But what does help Robert Spelaine mean as a depth linebacker? Of course, he was an unknown coming into this year, but now all things looking the way they're headed, he might be the 3rd linebacker on this depth chart. What could he mean moving forward as that 3rd guy in the middle?
He's going to give us what the Steelers should have had in 2019, which was a good 3 linebacker rotation with Mark Barron, Vince Williams, and Devin Bush. He's going to be legit that guy. I'm going to refer so much to the film room I put out like just recently on Mike Hilton because Robert Spelaine is a phenomenal green dog blitzer. I've talked about this before. Green dog is where you're in man coverage on a running back, and that running back stays in the block. What do? Well, if you're a green dog blitz, if you run what Keith Butler runs, the minute you realize that running back is blocking, you're a blitzer. Robert Spelaine transitions from coverage to blitz and sometimes back from blitz to coverage if the running back is like, oh, I'm blocking, but then I'm going to let loose and sneak out of here after you've committed. He's so quick at that transition. It's like Minkah Fitzpatrick level, like read and react speed. He's just like on the running back and then boom, going after the quarterback. One of the things I talked about in my Mike Hilton film room just covered week 2, where Mike Hilton and Devin Bush, Mike Hilton had a phenomenal game, just absolutely destroying Denver. One of the things I showed in there was how Mike Hilton sets up green dog blitzes because you keep someone in to block Mike Hilton. And if you keep a running back in, then one of our linebackers is coming. If you keep a tight end, one of our linebackers is coming. And the one game, I want to talk about this, Washington, where Spelaine played 21 snaps and Mike Hilton was actually healthy. Mike Hilton is back. Mike Hilton is playing Mike Hilton football. Robert Spelaine is good. 21 snaps into that game. Robert Spelaine had 2 QB hits and 1 quarterback sack. And they don't blitz Robert Spelaine. Those are green dog blitzes. He got to the quarterback 3 times in 21 snaps with Mike Hilton on the field. Like, if you've got Devin Bush, Mike Hilton, and Robert Spelaine out there, you don't want to defend. You don't want to be the offensive line trying to block that, because you know Mike Hilton's going to come. You know he's one of the best at those blitzes. You got Bush in coverage, so they're going to send him. And then you got Robert Spelaine, who can be in man coverage on that running back while Bush is taking the tight ends and doing his crazy stuff. And if you're keeping that back in to block Mike Hilton, Spillaine's coming, and he is good. He was terrible in the wild card game. Again, right back from injury. That's not this Robert Spelaine we saw at any point in the rest of the season. He was not good. He was slow. His mobility was gone. He couldn't change direction well. He shouldn't have been playing in that game. That's a guy who came back to try and give the Steelers something for the playoffs, and he didn't have it.
Now, I'm going to transition to the offensive side. There's a couple more defensive injuries we'll touch on as we head through this, but offensively, I really want to touch on Zach Banner. Of course, losing him week 1, super early in the year, tearing his ACL. The third of 3 guys that had such an injury this past season. What were the Steelers doing when Zach Banner was on the field? And do you see a world where the Steelers could forego even drafting a tackle to have Chuks Okorafor and Zach Banner as their starting 2?
Well, when it comes to the draft, my thing is always the Steelers don't have holes when they go to the draft. They fill them beforehand. They might not fill them with a player the fans like, but they have it so they can say, okay, if we don't get this position, we'll be okay. Zach Banner is one of those parts. He was really good in week 1 on run blocking, much better than we saw from Chuks Okorafor. And yet he was good enough in pass blocking that they trusted him to be in there and protect Ben. So I think he has a real good chance of fighting for and possibly winning that right tackle job again next season. I could see the Steelers walk into the draft with Okorafor and Banner and say, if we don't get a guy, we'll go with these 2, and we'll sign a free agent swing tackle who would probably be awful, kind of situation. Banner coming back really could make even Filer expendable. And the Steelers could go with a cheaper offensive line that way. So I do like Zach Banner coming back. I liked what I saw from him week 1. And he's that kind of guy that could be the future at right tackle. He could be that dude. Yeah,
it's going to be interesting to see how that kind of all works out. Of course, him tearing his ACL, it's probably going to lower his price tag, that 1-year, $5 million deal he signed before. Who knows what the number's going to be? Obviously, it's going to depend a lot on what the 2020 salary or 2021, what am I even talking about? Salary cap is going to be. There's room there. So before we even touch on those numbers, I think we'll wait a couple weeks until the owners and the association get together and actually figure out what's going on. But moving forward, staying on that offensive line, though, David Castro, he played majority of the games this year, received 8 All-Pro votes, Pro Bowl nomination. Of course, the Pro Bowl Madden tournament will be going down this week against the Pro Jersey. But David Castro, he wasn't himself throughout the year, and there was a lot of rumors that he was battling ab and knee injuries throughout the entire season. What do you expect if you can have a healthy David Castro coming back?
Well, by the end of the season, he was looking better. After Philadelphia, when he had that abdominal injury, he did not have the same power. He just didn't have the same power he had before that point. Until you get really to the end of the season, he starts looking more like David DeCastro. Not David Castro, like good David Castro, but looking like David DeCastro playing football. So I think he'll be okay. It's one of those situations where, like, okay, Pouncey and DeCastro, when they're healthy, they're really good still. But we saw Pouncey injured last season and how much that affected him, and not having Ben also affecting him. And we saw this season when David DeCastro was hurt, he wasn't himself. They're older. It takes longer to heal, and they get hurt more frequently. But when they're healthy, yeah, both those guys are still really good. David Castro especially, I expect him. You can put him. He's still a starter. He's still that guy.
Now, before we flip back over to the defensive side, there was one more player. Of course, Juju Smith-Schuster. He basically had middle days off during the week throughout the entire year because he battled a knee injury. Now, it's fairly certain that he won't be back next year, no matter what Ben says. It's just an affordability thing. It's just extremely unlikely unless a miracle happened when it came to the salary cap. But do you think his season, instead of talking about the injury, do you think he tanked his value through playing through a knee injury, especially coming off a poor 2019 season?
I don't know if it was the injury that affected him as much. His role in the offense, which could have been because of injury, really tanked his value. The Steelers, that's not how you use Juju Smith-Schuster. He is one of the better downfield receivers this team has. He's not a burner. He's not that deep threat guy, but he is a 15 to 30 yard route running guy. he's that guy you want to be throwing downfield to. He's very reliable downfield with his hands and adjusting to the ball. And he sets that up with the short routes. This year, there was no deep threat from him. Like, there was a couple games we got a few throws to him, but it really wasn't there outside of that. So for him, Juju needs a fresh start. That's my opinion. He needs to go someplace. I think we saw he's not a number one. I think we've seen that through the last 2 seasons. He's not really a number one, but give him a guy on the other side of him that is a talent that has to be accounted for, or put him on a team with a run game that takes most of the team's focus. So, they can't just focus on Juju Smith-Schuster. He's going to be great.
Now, before we move on to more injuries, just because I should have a story, it's either going to come out tomorrow or the day after, about Danny Amendola potentially being kind of the replacement of slot. We've talked a lot already about having a veteran guy in that position to kind of lead that group. Just to go on a random tangent, but do you think someone like Danny Amendola, who historically his numbers have been basically the exact same for 11 straight years, he's 35 years old, is that a move? Like, Larry Fitzgerald seems a little ridiculous just because he's an Arizona icon. Like, Pittsburgh, that would be fantastic, but you can plug in Danny Amendola and basically know exactly what you're going to get, and it's kind of a good fit, good price tag wise. Do you think the Steelers should legitimately look at a veteran wide receiver and potentially someone like that?
Yeah, he'd be a good fit. I do think a veteran receiver. I think you need one just to help Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool develop. We always had that. They would talk about the great Steelers receivers passing things down, where you had this unbroken line from Yancey Thigpen through Hines Ward to Antonio Brown, where they were showing younger guys tricks of the trade and getting them to work on their game. And then that's kind of broken now. Juju didn't have much time with Antonio Brown. That wasn't a long relationship, and it wasn't the best relationship. So what do we have? Like, who's that guy now? Who's that guy who's gonna be that guy in the locker room to be the leader and the veteran wide receiver? We don't have one. So I think that would be something worth bringing in, someone worth having. I think that's part of the reason we got the wide receiver coach we did, because he is a guy who had a long, successful career and can help with a lot of those things. But I think you still want a veteran receiver in that room that isn't the coach. You still want that. Yeah,
and basically for everyone who's saying that's not the guy, the reason why I say he is he's probably going to come at about $3.5 million price tag, something the Steelers could actually make sense work. And it's a position that they need to fill. It's just better for the future of this team, especially someone on a 1-year deal. But as we head to the top of our first half hour, I did also want to mention Joe Hayden, because I know once he got injured, this team changed considerably. They played some pretty terrible football, if we're being honest. But and I pray he's not a cap casualty, because we could speak at nauseum about how terrible the Steelers have been at drafting corners. But Joe Hayden, if he comes back, what happened with him, this defense when he wasn't there, and how much better is it when he's in the lineup?
Well, address how much better it is. If you look at the last 2 years, Joe Hayden has missed 3 games. In those games, in the times he has been out, and I'm counting after he got hurt in San Diego, he missed basically 2.5 games. But in the times he is out, the Steelers have 1 interception, and that was the very end of the San Diego Chargers game when Cameron Sutton caught that. Phillip Rivers was under pressure and just threw it long because the game was over. He just chucked it. Any other situation, he's not chucking that. Cameron, that's the only interception they have. They have 7 touchdowns given up. So a 7-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio when Joe Hayden isn't in there. And one of the things Hayden brings, when you see him attacking those underneath routes where he gets most of his interceptions and a lot of pass breaks up, that's where he got he got like 4 of his 5 interceptions on those in 2019, had a whole bunch of pass breakups where he's jumping out routes from the slot and letting Terrell Edmonds take his man deep, and Joe Hayden's just jumping that. The reason that's so valuable is because the linebacker on that side is Vince Williams. So if you get Vince Williams, the Steelers will be like, oh, look, Vince Williams is covering your slot receiver. and he's giving him like heavy. He's playing with heavy inside leverage. Well, yeah, Vince Williams is only playing that route if it goes inside. So he's given the receiver like 3 yards of cushion to the inside, and all he has to do is carry him across the middle if they go inside. If the guy goes outside, Joe Hayden is jumping that. When Joe Hayden was down and Cameron Sutton was in, Cameron Sutton wasn't doing that. That's not Cameron Sutton. He doesn't have those kind of, read and react, he doesn't have the experience to read a defense like that. He's not Joe Hayden. Like Joe Hayden still has his mind, still has his reactions from being a phenomenal cornerback, even if the athleticism isn't 100% there. So when Joe Hayden goes down, you lose interceptions and you give up easy yards to Joe Hayden's side of the field that normally you're not giving up. Is Joe Hayden that valuable if Devin Bush is healthy and playing? Maybe not. I don't. We haven't seen that. He's missing time, and Devin Bush is either a pretty brand new rookie, or or he's injured. That's the only games he's missed. But right now, yeah, Joe Hayden makes a big difference on that side, and he's very valuable.
And if the Steelers got to find money, they got to do it from elsewhere, in my opinion. Joe Hayden's too important to this team, but we are at the halfway point of our show. So if you're listening on the podcast side, just click over to part 2 number now. If you are listening on Facebook or YouTube, just hang tight. We will be back in just a moment. Pittsburgh Steelers fans, part 2 of the curtain call. Again, my name is Michael Beck, joined as always by one Mr. Geoffrey Benedict from BehindTheSteelCurtain.com, hanging out with, as always, part 1, talking about a lot of injury issues up in 2020 and how they can kind of shape the future of this team. Geoffrey, I know I touched on a few names. Is there anyone else that you want to kind of touch on that injury front heading into upcoming season?
Well, I don't think James Conner is going to be back. But if James Conner comes back, he was another one that when he went down, our run game really suffered. That's really it. Yeah, that's the only person I have left on my list.
Yeah, and with James Conner too, I think he'd be more successful as a runner, number 2. So if that could be in Pittsburgh, I'm not sure. Of course, he's going to hit that running back wall. It's just a certainty of the position. He's played 3 years, I guess.
My thoughts on James Conner's future with Pittsburgh. If the cap situation is such that the Steelers can keep an offensive line together, Pouncey doesn't retire, Ben comes back, that kind of situation, the value in the first round of drafting like a Najee Harris or one of these guys that teams that we look at and say, wow, they could make a difference on this run game. They would actually increase the value of James Conner as kind of a Kareem Hunt to the new guys, Nick Chubb. I think that would be an incredible 1-2 punch and kind of give us the chance at rebuilding this team very quickly in the 2004 mode, change the scheme up, focus on the run game, make life easier on the offensive line to block, and with the scheme, and you got 2 running backs. Yeah. Okay. Now it's a very different offense.
Yeah, no kidding. And it's going to be there's a lot of positions where there's tons of question marks. It's going to be a big couple months following the Super Bowl for us at Behind the Steel Curtain. I think this is going to be a pretty insane free agency, some crazy trades going on around the league. The draft is going to be, who even knows, the Steelers could draft at this point 100 different guys with their first, probably not 100, but there's probably a good list of like 50 names. Wouldn't be surprised if that's the way they would in the first round, trading up, trading back. It's going to be crazy. But moving on to the second part of this kind of show, and what we wanted to talk about also is kind of the pillars of the offense and defense, the pillars of the Steelers and how they can build around these guys. And Geoffrey, I know you kind of rank these guys in a tier. So why don't we start offensively? Who's in that tier 1 elite tier for guys we can build around on this offense?
Well, tier 1 for me is guys who are stars, who we're going to keep around, top talents, guys who can lead this team and be like Pro Bowlers, perennial Pro Bowlers, the kind of guys you can base the offense around. And on offense, I've got nobody. Not a single player.
And that's completely fair, just based on this team's kind of trajectory. And the star players are either on their way out or are really old and are basically done to begin with. Would you say that's something the Steelers really need to kind of try to address in this upcoming draft, that like the future of this offense really comes from the next 2 draft classes, really?
I'm not worried about that. It's weird. Like we've got solid talent. What I think we need is a better scheme in place while we have Ben Roethlisberger, and when we do get a new quarterback in the future, you build around that guy. That's going to be hopefully your star, and then you allow other guys to develop around him. So for me, the real issue, if you're looking for a big time playmaker to add right away, like I've said, if this is our final if this is our final year of being all in on Ben, I could see drafting a playmaking running back, because that's when you take that running back, is when you're like, you know what, we just need that run game. We need to manufacture some kind of a run game to help this out, and bam, that's what you do. Outside of that, offensive line, build from the front, get some studs on the offensive line, and let it go from there.
You know what? If that's the way the Steelers go, if they're going to pull and you draft a running back in the first round, and all of a sudden 3 guys retire, 4 more guys disappear in free agency, there's going to be some people in the hot seat for that, for sure. Like that's very all in for basically 1 year, and that's going to be interesting. Like, if the Steelers traded back, I would never hate a pick if they added another pick, but that will be interesting. Now, moving into the second tier of guys offensively, who do you think are these kind of tier 2 prospects that the Steelers kind of have some sort of ability to kind of plug in as potential guys to help lead this team in the future?
Well, my tier 2 is guys that I think have the potential to become stars, maybe, but they're going to be, solid guys you can rely on to be a starter in the future. So for me, that is Chase Claypool, Deontay Johnson, and Kevin Dotson. I think those 3 guys you can plug in and say 2-3 years from now, we can rely on them to be, major parts of the offense.
Right. Now, there's one thing I really want to bring up here. Kieran Broomsey says Master Teague or Hubbard on the board in the 4th round. Let's just go all in on the Canadians. Why not? While we're drafting them, Chuba Hubbard from Alberta. We already got Chase Claypool, Matt Canada, the offense coordinator. Let's just go all in on the Canadians. I love it. But getting back top and the tier 3 guys, what designates someone as a tier 3 player, and what is their future with this offense?
Tier 3 players would be like, they're a piece, right? They're a guy that can help, like a Vince Williams. When Vince Williams was young and he kind of shown, hey, he's a guy that's going to stick around, he's going to be a solid player, he would be a tier 3 guy from back then. For me on this team, that's talking about guys like a Chuks Okorafor, who has shown he can be a starter. He can handle it and be all right. He wasn't great, especially in the run game, but he wasn't as bad as people thought he was either. He had a lot of turnover beside him, and him and Castro struggled when Castro was not playing well. Another guy would be Zach Banner. Zach Banner is a guy you could see being that starter for a number of years, or at least a valuable rotation piece. And my other one would be Anthony McFarland. I think Anthony McFarland is going to be a better running back than we've seen. Of course, I blame scheme for a lot of the Steelers' run game problems. I'm not as big on trashing the offensive line and the running backs. If you watch the scheme, it's like the run game was set up to fail all year.
Right. Now, flipping things over to the defensive side, I think the pillars are probably going to be pretty obvious, especially at the top. Who are those star guys for the Steelers, and what does it mean for this team having them for the next 10 years?
TJ Watt, Devin Bush, Minkah Fitzpatrick. Those are 3 guys you can't let go. Like if any of those guys go, it's bad. Your team is you can't replace them. And it's big to me because when you say Minkah Fitzpatrick, Devin Bush, that's the middle of your defense saying you can't attack the middle of the field. NFL offenses live in the middle of the field. And when you have 2 guys like that can just shut down the middle of a field and say, if you're going to attack the middle of the field, we'll be the ones making plays, then that's a solid defense at the minimum for a long time. And TJ Watt, of course, a defensive player of the year level guy. He's a no-brainer.
Now, some people might hate this comparison just based on who I'm going to kind of put them up against, but the Baltimore Ravens from about 2005 to 2015. I mean their defense was really good. Like they had a stream of guys coming in and out, but the similarities are extremely close. Like Terrell Suggs on the edge, TJ Watt in the middle, Devin Bush, Ray Lewis, and on the end, Reed, Minkah Fitzpatrick. Do you agree with that? Is that kind of what the Steelers can kind of bank on for their next 10 years of this future of this defense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I would look at the Ravens and say that's the kind of thing you want to build. Minkah Fitzpatrick as a free safety is not Ed Reed. I want to start with that. As a safety, he is not Ed Reed. Devin Bush reminds me of a young Ray Lewis. Significantly reminds me of a young Ray Lewis. I think he could not approach Ray Lewis. Ray Lewis brought so much more than just his on-field play, though. He was a phenomenal leader, and in that time period, middle linebacker stuffing the run was such a bigger role, and he brought the versatility that like a Devin Bush brings. So he won't. I don't think Devin Bush even has the opportunity to be as valuable as Ray Lewis because of how the game has changed. But he could reach that kind of a talent level, even if he is smaller. You know, Ray Lewis was also bigger. It's just he can be that kind of a talent, but he's not going to have the impact Ray Lewis had, but he can be that to the Steelers. And TJ Watt, yeah. TJ Watt can be that kind of Terrell Suggs guys there that's just like, no, I'm making plays. I mean, you look at JJ Watt. Outside of JJ Watt when he gets hurt, he's still just a monster to deal with. And that's kind of what Terrell Suggs was for a decade. I think TJ Watt can be that guy. So yeah, it's a good thing. You should just be able to say, hey, we don't have to hit superstars with these picks. We just need really good players who fit with the guy with around our core of these three players.
And you know, it's funny. You mentioned that, and I agree. Minkah's no Ed Reed, but unless Cincinnati starts winning games and Jesse Bates starts getting some recognition, Minkah Fitzpatrick could bring home a ton of hardware throughout the next couple of years. There really isn't too many guys that could project to surpass him at that spot. He could be that all-pro free safety for years and years to come. I wouldn't be surprised by that in the slightest. But kind of moving on to that second tier, who's kind of pairing with those top three guys?
My three, I'm going to get some flack for one of them. I'll start with Alex Highsmith.
I know where you're going.
Alex Highsmith, I think, is shown he's going to be a starter, and his upside is really, really good. I love this is a player I love, so I'm going to compare him to a player I absolutely loved, Jason Worlds, who was much better than people thought he was. He wasn't a TJ Watt. He wasn't a Joey Porter. He wasn't a James Harrison. You know, he wasn't that guy who's just going to be on that edge and the other team is like, we have to seriously account for that guy and he's still going to wreck you. He's not going to be that dude, but he could be that number two rusher that really sets up the other guy and is just consistently good. And that's kind of what Jason Worlds did. Jason Worlds did everything really well. And that's what I look at Alex Highsmith, even as a rookie. He did everything good. When he gets better, he can do everything really well. I think he's a piece, a big piece, an important one. I'll get in probably a little trouble for this one, but Terrell Edmonds.
I knew you were going to say that.
Terrell Edmonds. And here's why Terrell Edmonds is valuable. Terrell Edmonds is going to constantly draw this comparison, not directly to the not Terrell Edmonds' skill set to this player's skill set, but the way they complement the other safety in the backfield. Terrell Edmonds can be Minkah Fitzpatrick's Ryan Clark. He's not Ryan Clark. He's a very different player. He's a strong safety.
Can't be the same player anymore.
Yeah. What Minkah Fitzpatrick, what Terrell Edmonds is a guy who can fill any role. He can do anything on the field at a decent level. Like he can slide down and play middle linebacker. He can play slot cornerback. He can play outside cornerback. He can be a thumper in the box. He can play free safety. That's probably the least good of his things. But he can do it all at a reasonably good level. He's really good in man coverage. Obviously, people will call out that there are times he gets abused in mismatches. He'll get beat because the Steelers put him in bad spots constantly. They put him in tough coverage spots a lot because most of the time he delivers. The vast majority of the time he delivers. People bring up the playoff game. I see people bringing up the playoff game already. You can bring up any player you want for the playoff game. TJ Watt was terrible in the playoff game. TJ Watt was bad. You know, that Are we going to hold that against TJ Watt? No. That whole game was bad. Everyone played badly in that game. So you can point your finger at any one of them. Cameron Hayward was bad. Stephon Tuitt was bad. TJ Watt was bad. We're not getting rid of them. They're still good players. There was just one really awful game. Anyways, Terrell Edmonds, the reason he works with Minkah Fitzpatrick is not a sideline-to-sideline player. He's not. And that's what really separates him from Ed Reed is he has the skill set of Ed Reed, but Ed Reed was much more of a sideline to sideline player. Minkah Fitzpatrick is more of a read and attack forward player. To me, I would compare it to like Robert Spelaine and Devin Bush. Devin Bush is not a good blitzer. He's not good at seeing the play in front of him and pouncing on it super quick. That's more Robert Spelaine. Devin Bush has that athleticism and is a fantastic lateral movement player. Obviously, they're reversed in their talent level. Robert Spelaine is not anywhere on the level of Minkah Fitzpatrick, but it's a similar style of game. Minkah Fitzpatrick is elite when he is seeing the play in front of him and attacking forward. He's not great if it's like, oh, we're throwing a shot down the sideline. Can Minkah Fitzpatrick get there in time to make a play on the ball? No. The answer is no. He's not going to do it. That's just not his game. Terrell Edmonds takes that off of him by being that lateral speed, sideline to sideline player. That's where Edmonds is at his best, is securing tackles. And that's another thing. We talk about Minkah Fitzpatrick. He misses tackles. You don't want him being that guy that's in charge of tackling everybody. Terrell Edmonds is that guy. Terrell Edmonds should consistently have more tackles than Minkah Fitzpatrick because he gets to the ball and he brings people down.
Right. Now, that's two names. Who's the third name of your second tier?
I'm going to go with Robert Spelaine. I'm a huge Robert Spelaine fan. I've done film rooms on him in the past. I'm going to do more. In this defense, he is a man coverage guy. He does man coverage against linebackers and tight ends. He is a screen pass destroyer. He is very solid attacking forward from a zone defense position, especially in run support. What he isn't is, your typical buck linebacker. You don't want him taking on blockers. He doesn't get off blocks great. He did better later in the season. He's getting better at that already. And he is elite as a green dog blitzer. He is just watching him transition from coverage to blitzing is phenomenal. You're just like, that's how you do it. You're watching it. You're like, Devin Bush can't do that. Devin Bush can't. When Devin Bush is a green dog blitzer, you're like, oh, Devin, like, what are you doing? You're just kind of like walking around trying to see if anyone's going to come towards you. Robert Spelaine is just boom. It's like an attack dog. Like, go get him. And the dog he's already halfway there. By the time you finish saying it, I think he is such a good fit with Devin Bush that he becomes that fit. Like, he's the Terrell Edmonds, Minkah Fitzpatrick. He's the Terrell Edmonds in that to Devin Bush, in my opinion. I think he could be that guy. I love it.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. Obviously, there's going to be people that disagree with that, but for those of you that do, you got to keep in mind, Geoffrey watches more film than probably all of us combined, so he does know what he's talking about. If you think he's crazy, I guarantee you he's not. He might be a little bit, but
I'm crazy.
But moving on to that third tier, obviously for everyone screaming, "Oh, Cam Hayward, Stephon Tuitt, Joe Hayden." This is about building towards the future. The age it matters in this situation, but I'm curious whether or not some of those guys make your third tier.
No, I didn't go with any of them. I didn't go with any of them because I think looking at their age, you're not building a defense around them in 3 years.
Yeah.
In 3 years, you're still building a defense around Devin Bush, Minkah Fitzpatrick, and TJ Watt. Robert Splain's still young. So for me, that last spot, tier 3, is Cameron Sutton and Mike Hilton. That's their kind of like, I think the Steelers are keeping one. I just have this feeling the Steelers are keeping one, and whichever one they keep, that's a guy they're going to build around. Very different skill sets. So it would mean a lot of difference. It's a fascinating choice to me because it's going to be the Steelers committing to two very different ideas of defense. If Cameron Sutton is your cornerback, then you're doing different things than if Mike Hilton is your cornerback. You're designing your defense differently. I really hope they sign Hilton. I absolutely love Mike Hilton. If you remember when the Penguins had like Pascal Dupuis, and he was just that dude that embodied the system, Mike Hilton embodies Mike Tomlin's philosophy of football and Keith Butler's system like no one else we have ever found. We were constantly drafting, looking for that guy to be that slot linebacker. You can go all the way back to Shamarko Thomas. They tried playing him in the slot. Why? Because they wanted that guy who could play the slot like a linebacker. And then they found him in Mike Hilton. And he's the best in the NFL at it. I know the Scobro show, they were talking about him and like saying, what kind of market is there for him? There are some teams who look for that. Look at the contract. What was his name? Logan Ryan got from the New York Giants. He was that cornerback in Tennessee. And then he went to New York Giants on a really good contract and didn't do well because that's not the system the New York Giants run. It was a dumb acquisition by the Giants because you picked a guy with a specific skill set and then we're like, yeah, but we can use you differently, right? We'll just have you do something different. Minka Fitzpatrick, we're going to have you be a cover cornerback. Like how Miami, that was my point. Miami was misusing Minka Fitzpatrick. The Steelers got him and said, that's not what you do at all. No. Okay, let's find a position for you then. Let's figure out. And they redesigned how they use the free safety position between Sean Davis and Minka Fitzpatrick. Minka Fitzpatrick doesn't play what Sean Davis played at all. They play a different entire role in the defense, which is brilliant. You take a player who doesn't quite fit the traditional role, and then you remake your defense to work for him, and you get Minka Fitzpatrick as an all-pro safety. The same is true of Hilton, and I think he has it for a few more years. So 2-3 years, I'd go with Mike Hilton. But if they go with Sutton, that's fine too. It just means different things.
I will say I think Cam Sutton fell out of favor with this team. Like when it came to those kind of cornerback replacements, seemed like Justin Lane overtook him, and then Justin Lane played terribly, and then James Pierre took over from him. It just does. It feels like Mike Hilton's the kind of the odds-on favorite, I would say, to me, for someone getting another contract. But this might sound dumb to some, but I'm Canadian, and you got to give me a break. Mike Hilton is made for the Canadian game, the super wide field, because the will linebacker in Canadian football. It is like it's basically. It's a weird like corner linebacker hybrid. That's exactly what Mike Hilton is, and that's been a position in that game for 100 years. It's funny how it's kind of came over into the NFL, and Mike Hilton's clearly the best at it. He'd probably be the league MVP if he was playing up here. But it's going to be interesting to see where the team goes with that. But do you think I'm far off by saying that Cam Sutton's probably not the guy? And because to me, it just looked like he completely fell off the Steelers' radar as the year went on.
I wouldn't say that. He was getting a lot of snaps. They just. I think you saw James Pierre and Justin Lane have very specific skill sets, and so like when they came on the field, they weren't so much fitting those guys to Cameron Sutton. They were fitting Cameron Sutton to what those guys could do best. So that's what kind of how I view Cameron Sutton. And to me, one of the problems we've had with Cameron Sutton is Steven Nelson doesn't miss games. The one game Steven Nelson was out and Cameron Sutton filled in for Steven Nelson, he did really good because he's that corner. He's a Steven Nelson type corner. If you remember, Steven Nelson was a slot corner in Kansas City. He played a lot of slot. Here, he's completely outside because in our system, that fits him. Nelson does not... Was I saying the wrong name? Nelson. Steven Nelson.
No, Steven Nelson. That's right.
Okay. My brains. But
okay.
Nelson here does a lot more deeper coverage. He passes off underneath routes a lot, and he just locks people down deep, and he's great in deep zones. That's Cameron Sutton. If you pass off the underneath routes and let Cameron Sutton know, hey, your big job is to cover deep, he's really good. Cameron Sutton is phenomenal at that. I'll go back to the year he was drafted. His college film showed that as long as you didn't lay hands on him, he was probably the best cornerback in college until people got physical. And then he vanished. He just disappeared off the field. It was kind of like he was like the defensive back version of Justin Hunter. If you remember him from the Steelers. And he's gotten better. He's gotten better with the physical side, but he is so much better when he is just allowed to cover deep, play the ball, use his deep instincts, read the ball in the air. He's so good at that. It's one of the reasons you see him drop from a nickel, from a dime cornerback spot all the way deep on third and long and on second and really long a lot, is because the Steelers know he is that good deep. He is just that good. So if he comes back, it would be more of a Steven Nelson. That's kind of what you're going for, is they could possibly peg him to be the next Steven Nelson.
Yeah, and it's going to be kind of interesting to see how they decipher between the two. But as we approach the top of the show, there is one other topic I want to get to. We didn't break it down yet, but the Senior Bowl, of course, is this week. Do you think teams should take a lot of interest in that game, just based on it being literally just one kind of all-star type game? Of course, the players are going extremely hard. It's their NFL futures on the line. Does the Senior Bowl mean anything to you when it comes to drafting a player?
It does to me, because it separates players from their system. So you're in college, you were like especially really good teams. If you're in Alabama, if you're in Ohio State, if you're on these teams, you were chosen to play a specific role. You were recruited because you fit that role in their scheme. When you get to the Senior Bowl, you start getting these players outside of their scheme, and you also give a chance for a lot of these unknown players to face off against big name guys, players from the SEC, and show, hey, you know what? My team couldn't match up with the SEC, but I could have. So it means a lot to me. I'll go back. Kevin Dotson tore up in the Senior Bowl. He was absolutely phenomenal in the Senior Bowl, and we saw that translate directly to the NFL right away. So I do like the Senior Bowl. I think it has its place. I think it definitely has its place. If you know what you're looking for, and you have an idea of what you're dealing with in the Senior Bowl, so that you can translate it to the NFL.
Now, when it comes to that Senior Bowl, of course, something I've been closely kind of watching, especially come the national championship and whatnot. Mac Jones, a quarterback from Alabama. It's like, oh, why are people mocking him as a first-round pick? The guy's playing an all-star team. It's probably the easiest quarterback position to play in the country, is being the quarterback for Alabama. But he has been having a fantastic little Senior Bowl practice week so far. He was one of the players of the day. If the Steelers go quarterback and they happen to take a guy like Jones, if he's still there, because his kind of market's kind of skyrocketing, would you feel a little bit better because he had such a good Senior Bowl performance?
Yeah, I would. I don't really necessarily want him, because he would be kind of a continuation. You would plug him in and be like, oh, this is what we're looking for. We're looking for another Ben Roethlisberger, Landry Jones, Mason Rudolph type of guy. We're just going to do it in the first round this time. I'd be okay with it. It could work. As to his team, yeah, it's a totally different world when you are the quarterback for Alabama. But look at the team Joe Burrow had. He had an absolute all-star team. He was playing with NFL receivers, with NFL offensive linemen. You know what he's doing in the NFL? He's playing with NFL wide receivers. Those guys kind of I think actually have a bit of a leg up on a lot of other players just with timing. Like Mac Jones knows, I've got a receiver who just will burn the pitch when he starts running. He will burn the field when he starts running. I have to be able to hit him. If I'm going to be the quarterback at Alabama, you've got to be able to hit those passes. And one of the things you see with like a Mason Rudolph, whose deep passes were the James Washington, is he struggled with timing in 2019. He struggled with timing up those routes a lot. Got better in 2020, but you're talking year 3. That's his third year in the NFL, and he's finally catching up this stuff. The guys who deal with that talent and can excel with that level of talent, they have to make decisions faster, simply because those guys are done with the routes faster.
Yeah, as the top show, I just want to make sure we have a little bit of time to plug our stuff coming up in the next couple of days. So, Geoffrey, is there any fun film rooms coming out this week?
I just dropped Mike Hilton from week 2. That is a really good one. I love that one a lot. Next week is going to be Devin Bush and Vince Williams in week 3 against Houston. It's going to be a really good one if you want more on where Vince Williams places, what kind of role Robert Spelaine could play in the future next to Devin Bush, and the real value of Devin Bush to the Pittsburgh Steelers defense. That's this coming film room next week.
And taking a step back to, like, going back to our conversation about Mac Jones there, I think that's one of the reasons why Jeff and I both want to trade up for Trey Lance so bad, is just for something different. I think that's I think a lot of Steeler fans would appreciate something a little bit different. So I think there's possibility you might see that as the weeks go by, but who knows?
I don't want to trade up for Trey Lance.
Why is that?
I don't want a quarterback this year.
Hmm.
I am firmly of the mind that the longer we drag this out and rebuild the offensive line, that's my thing. I want to rebuild the offensive line and then get a quarterback.
Yeah, and you know what? That's totally fair. It's kind of the reverse Cincinnati. Don't get your guy's knee torn to shreds.
Yeah.
But I guess with that being said, make sure to click over to behindthesteelcurtain.com. Great stuff coming out each and every day. Stuff even looking at the Super Bowl. The Steelers going to participate in that game. Draft coverage, free agency. The season's over, but the ball keeps on rolling. There's going to be a lot of content coming out each and make sure it's an entire Behind the Steel Curtain family podcast. Of course, if you're listening on YouTube and Facebook, there's tons of exclusive content just on the podcast side. Anywhere you get your podcast. So make sure click over, tune into that as well. So for my co-host, Geoffrey Benedict, once again, my name is Michael Beck. Thank you for tuning in. We'll catch you guys